Well, thank you so much for joining me today. For anyone listening, please make sure to check out our socials. We do upload our events and content on our Instagram and also Twitter now, and then Facebook as well. And then we do have a Blackboard on MyDundee, we have a page on MyDundee called DUPS. It's on the same page as where you find the School of Social Sciences. So please make sure to check it out as well. We do use that for our online events. So today we're joined by Alissa Millinger, Head of Psychology. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
So I'm just going to jump into it. So what's it called? What is your main research area?
What is my main research area? Well, my main research area tends to change every now and then, but at the moment, my main research area is looking at how we select the words that we're looking for when we're trying to speak, and specifically how we get the words that fit not just the meaning that we want to convey, so saying cat and not dog, but also matching the kind of social situation that we're in. So making sure we don't swear in the wrong context, or not being overly technical with somebody who wouldn't be familiar with those words. So making sure that the register is right, making sure that the dialect is right. So again, when I go back to the US, I have to make sure that I don't use the British words that I'm using here, or everybody there will think I'm super arrogant using British words. So, it's about how do we manage those competing factors to make sure that we find the right word for every situation. That's my hot topic at the moment.
How did you get into that area? I know you've done, from working with you as well, I know you've done some research on dialect. How did you get into this entire research area basically?
Well, I'd already been working on the question about how we select words for a really long time, and trying to understand how different meanings link up with different words, and how we then choose the right meaning and not the wrong meaning. So I'd already been doing that for a long time. And then, like all good research ideas, my inspiration came at the pub, because we were out with, this is a long, I'll try and make it short. We were out at the pub celebrating with a student who just finished her Viva. So she just completed her PhD, and she was from Lawrencekirk, which is just up from Dundee, just up the coast from Dundee. And they have quite a heavy Scottish dialect, quite unique. But I never had any problems understanding her, because she always leveled her accent when she would speak with me. So she would speak kind of a standard Scottish dialect. But her brother showed up at the pub, and she'd had a drink or two, and she was all excited. And so when she would speak to her brother, if she was speaking to him the way she would speak to me, he found it really unnatural, because that's not the way they would normally speak to one another. They would normally speak in dialect. So then he was all confused, and so then she would switch into dialect, but then she'd switch back to me, and she'd stay in dialect, and then I wouldn't have a clue what she was saying. And I just watched this exchange happening, and I thought, this looks really familiar to me. This is really similar to what you see with bilinguals, when bilinguals maybe have a drink or two, or are switching between a second and third language rather than their first or second language. You see this kind of confusion in terms of switching, and I thought, this is really interesting what's happening in front of me here. I have to know more about it. So it was all inspired at the pub, like all good research ideas.
That's so funny. I feel like I can relate to that a lot, because I'm bilingual. I speak Danish and English as well. And when I speak to my Danish friends, they find me as a different person than when they speak both Danish and English as well. But when I change language, they see two different personalities almost. Yeah. So that kind of switching between what you're actually using, and yeah, I find that's quite cool as well.
And it's very weird if you are used to speaking Danish with somebody, and then you, for whatever reason, speak English with them. It feels so weird. It feels like you're not being yourself with them in that moment. So, I find that really fascinating, that link, the way language links up with so many different things.
Yeah, I remember in school they used to, when I had my Danish friends and I spoke English to them, or when I had my Danish friends and then my English friends would ask, why don't you just speak English to them as well? And I would say it doesn't fit. It just feels wrong. It feels like you're breaking a rule or something almost.
Yeah, it feels exactly. No, I totally get that as well. It
Yeah.
is something about you speak with somebody a particular way, and then if you want to speak to them in a different way, it just feels wrong. It's not what you're used to, and there's something deep in that.
Yeah, it's almost like your brain can't compute it. Like it just doesn't, there's something like biologically wrong. When you, so you started your education in the US, didn't you? Before you came to
Yep.
the US. How did you start off being like, oh, I love psychology, I want to do this the rest of my life? Or how did it all like start out, I guess you could say?
Well, nothing is the direct path for me anyway. So my first love was languages and linguistics. That was what I was interested in, and that was what I was studying. So I actually started to do my postgraduate studies in linguistics, but we had linguistics together with what's called cognitive science, which is a kind of superstructure above any one discipline. So cognitive science is usually linguistics, psychology, computer science, philosophy, other disciplines as well, maybe anthropology if they had it. But the idea of cognitive science is trying to understand how humans work, and sort of to get computers to do what humans do, but the way humans do it. So it's about understanding how humans work, but from this sort of multi-directional approach. So I was studying linguistics, but because it was in this cognitive science context, I was also taking computer science classes and psychology classes. And I happened to take a psychology class, which was something called, it was something like human sentence processing. So it was about sentence processing. And that was my first real exposure to psychology in grad school. I didn't really have it as an undergrad. And so I was doing this psychology class, and we were talking about sentence processing and asking questions about, whether, whether certain things that we think of in language are real for the speaker, or whether they're just artificial. So like a comma, we would talk about when you're reading a sentence, how important the comma is to the meaning of that sentence. But then we were like, well, but is the comma real for the reader? Does the reader have a representation for the comma, or is the comma something else? So I started asking these questions about, are the representations that we think we're using, or the representations that we think we have from a linguistic standpoint, are they real in a processing sense for the speaker or for the reader? And so I started asking those sorts of psychological questions in the context of my linguistics lectures. And that just sort of started me down this road of psycholinguistics, of asking those sorts of questions.
What was the main focus? I mean, I don't really know much about linguistics, but what's the main difference between linguistics and then psycholinguistics or psychology of language?
Well, so psycholinguistics or psychology of language would be really looking at that processing part of it. So what are the psychological processes that allow us to understand or use or learn language? But linguistics would be everything. It would be just understanding how languages differ, understanding what the structures of language are. So understanding how languages, what the grammar is, maybe describing the grammar, trying to find universals that are common to all languages. It would also then be, kind of the detailed sort of zeroing in on all the different levels of representation. So linguistics itself traditionally is nothing to do with the psychology side. In fact, Chomsky, who's the father of modern linguistics, kind of rejected the whole idea that we care about how language is used. He was only interested in what we know about language and what the kind of representations are. So for a long time in the field, there was this real separation where true linguists were very like, no, we don't care about the use of language. We only want to know about the internal representations. But it's really changed a lot over the last years. And even I think Chomsky today wants to have something to do with processing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the part of it that's most, I guess, not relevant, but most relatable for most people. That's the part where they're, for example, of processing, when they make an error, those kind of things, people notice that and they think about it a lot more than, for example, what language is used for overall in the world. I guess you could say, like in everyday use, you kind of think about those things more.
Yeah, you think about when it goes wrong. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you notice that when something I remember in your lectures as well, you mentioned that as well, like when errors happen, and I feel like that was at least the point for me in like the language lectures where everything kind of clicked for me, where I realized like, oh, okay, this is why this is so important, or this is why it's so relevant, is when you make an error. Why do you think, I mean, I found language quite difficult, but why do you think in general some students see language as like the almost the most difficult, or like the most challenging part of psychology?
Well, I don't know. I've thought about this a lot. I think there's maybe a couple of reasons. First of all, I think there is that issue that people don't introspect about language. Language, we've all been speaking since we were like 1.5, 2 years old, and we don't reflect on it. It's not something that we have to think about, and it's not something that we have a lot of insight into. So unless you're like a creative writer and you're really thinking about the specific word, or unless you're like an orator and you're really thinking about the shades of meaning between this and that, most of us just blah blah blah. We just say what's on our mind, and we don't have a lot of reflection. And so that reflection is very difficult. That introspection about what you're doing is very, very difficult to break into. It's sort of a closed box in a lot of respects. And to get into the box, you need a lot of knowledge. You need to know a lot of sort of linguistic knowledge to really start to open the box and understand all the technical terms. So there's a lot of technical terms. So I think that's one reason. And then the other reason, which is maybe related, is we really focus in the language lectures on data and evidence and experiments, and then the models. The models are quite detailed. And they're kind of subtle. It's like, oh, this one has an arrow going down and that one has an arrow going up, and it's totally different model. They're just totally separate with different predictions and different everything. And I think that's a level of detail that's maybe not found in some of the other modules at level 3, but it's kind of important for language. So we can't really, we haven't found a way to do it in a more abstract way without getting into the models. So I think that makes it difficult, but
I guess you could say there's almost like a barrier. There's like, once you get over that barrier, then everything kind of unfolds for you. But you have to get over that, like the grammatics and like the different processing and like the different theories and things before you start actually able to understand and relate it to, I guess, yourself in like the most self way.
Maybe. I mean, I just think, it's as I said, it's a closed box. So I'm showing you these models, but it's hard to connect the model to your own self. So there's that sort of barrier. So we try by talking about, errors, or talking about, real life things like real ambiguities in language that you might see, on a sign or whatever, to trying to demonstrate why these things are important. But there are difficulties. There's just a lot to get on top of.
I feel like it's for me personally, it's one of those lectures where when I'm in the lecture, it doesn't all make sense. But then when I, for example, communicate with someone and they, let's say, have a really ambiguous sentence and I don't really understand what they mean, and then I ask, that's when it clicks. So like it doesn't click in the moment, but it clicks like a few days after, like a week after. Then I'm like, oh wait, this is what we're talking about in class.
Yeah, sometimes I think if I had maybe twice as much time, then I could have like the lecture, and then I could have like some kind of activity that sort of illustrates things. Then it might be better, but that's not an option at the moment.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, I think activities, that sort of living it, trying to feel it, trying to link it to your everyday experience helps with understanding it.
Yeah, once it clicks, then you can, as I said, like then everything unfolds almost. But before it clicks, it doesn't. It's difficult. You also recently became the head of psychology, which I wanted to ask you about as well. Like for anyone listening, what does the head of psychology exactly do, and then how are you finding it so far?
Wow. What do they do? Well, I guess my role as head of psychology is to be the kind of bridge between the school level things that are happening and the discipline level things that are happening. So to make sure that the discipline within psychology, that we're getting the resources that we need and the support that we need, and that and the acknowledgement that we need from the school, but also that I communicate upwards to the school so they know that what we're doing. So you're kind of like a communication funnel. Then you're also on the ground just trying to make sure that things hold together, things are happening. So obviously everybody's got their own jobs, like Elaine is head of learning and teaching, so she's making sure that all the teaching stuff is going smoothly. But then I'm there backing her up and making sure if something's not going smoothly, then I can go up to the school and try and get something sorted out. So it's a lot of bureaucracy, to be honest, that I didn't expect. I mean, the amount of red tape, the amount of like form, fill in this form, like read this paper and send me your thoughts, which my thoughts are like, well, I don't know. It's a lot of bureaucracy, which I didn't necessarily expect. So I think it's going all right. I think it's really important. Also, as head, I have to be visible to the students. I think it's quite important that the students know who I am, and that the students know that they can come to me if they've got a problem. Of course, there's like they should see their advisor, and they should see the lecturer, and they should then see, depending on who the problem is, but that I'm a contact point for them, and to make sure that they're having the best experience possible. So there's a lot of different components to it to try and make sure that things go smoothly and that the students have a good experience and that the staff have a good experience and that the university is happy with us and all of that kind of stuff.
I guess it's like the glue that no one really notices. Like you're like almost in the background making sure, like holding everything together and making sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to. But the individual student might not in like the first instant be like, oh yeah, that's who it is. Like they might be thinking of like their advisor and like their modules and being stressed about assignments and things. But I feel like it's important to know. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, if everything's going perfectly, then maybe nobody should have to know who I am at all. But of course, we're living in a pandemic, so it's definitely not an ideal situation.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time you became head of psychology. It's
definitely.
I can't even imagine how much communication and different just different information that has to be passed around almost. In terms of, for example, like research, how is that like how are you balancing everything? Because I feel like I know you do lectures in both level 1 and level 2, and I'm not sure if you do it in level 4 as well. But like lectures, research, and head of psychology, like how are you planning everything, and how are you managing your time as well as that?
Well, I have to admit, you probably know this because you've been working in my lab, and I haven't really been in contact. So I think the answer is at the moment, I haven't really been balancing things very well. So the head of discipline role is taking up a huge amount of my time, especially because of all the planning for the pandemic, and we have a lot of new staff this year. We have a lot of excellent new colleagues, but they have to be oriented and inducted in, and there's a lot of training, and I have to make sure they're doing all right. And everybody's new to blended learning, so there's a lot of just checking in, making sure people are doing okay, sharing of information. So for sure, my own research is suffering. Plus, because we're not doing online in-person testing, everything has to move to Gorilla. So I have to, I didn't have access to the build like everybody else. I didn't have access to the building all summer, so I couldn't go into my lab to get the stuff that I needed to even think about starting to move things onto Gorilla. But I went in at the start of term. I was allowed to go in, and I downloaded, backed everything up off of the machines in the lab. But yeah, I just haven't had a lot of time. So I think I just have to accept that, at least right now, with everything that's new and everything that's going on, that the research has to take a back seat a little bit. But it can't be like that forever. So I do have to find a way to make more space for my own research. But just the learning curve for the head of discipline thing at the same time as the pandemic was quite steep. So there's a lot to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I feel like once you might figure out what, I think it's also because everything is so uncertain. So you don't you have to constantly learn new things, almost like blended learning, and then more restricted blended learning, all the way from completely normal, just in-person teaching. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I think everyone is suffering a lot, but I guess the planning of everything is almost one of the most difficult things because you're trying to make everyone happy, but also following the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had I think an entire month of just trying to figure out the timetable and like who could do in person. And you might remember that, well, you might not know this actually, but like during the summer, things with the pandemic seemed to be going better. You know, the numbers were down and the curve was flattening, and so the university sort of said, well, we suspect that we'll be able to reduce to a 1 meter social distancing rule when term starts, because like England moved to a 1 meter social
Yeah.
distancing, and so they decided they had planned everything for 2 meters, but then they were like, no, I think we can probably anticipate a 1 meter. So we had to change everything. They got architects in to like do the spacing in the classrooms, like to see like
Oh,
what's the distance, how many people can each room take, and what's what's the layout of the room have to be in order to have 1 meter social distancing. And then I don't know, maybe just like 2 weeks before the start of term, Aberdeen had like a cluster,
oh
and so
yeah.
then they brought in some new restrictions in Aberdeen, and then the same thing happened in Lanarkshire. So they brought in some new restrictions in Lanarkshire, and then the university was like, okay, this 1 meter thing's not happening. And so we had to go back to 2 meters. So like all this planning for timetabling and like in-person teaching, like we thought we could do our level 4 modules in person because if it was a 1 meter social distancing, we could have had space for that. All of that went out the window, and we had to start from scratch and like get new layouts and new numbers and replan everything. And it was just a lot of scrambling because of the uncertainty.
And this was 2 weeks before university started.
Well, I can't remember if it was 2 weeks but it was not that far in advance.
Yeah, no, even if it was a month before, I feel like that would be stressful.
It was just the fact that we'd already, like, there was this monster big spreadsheet that we had to fill in. And then it was just like, right, that's done, start again. So definitely the uncertainty of the pandemic makes things more difficult for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, well, I didn't actually know that, but that explains a lot, I feel like, for me at least. And I assume for a lot of students as well, why everything was so sudden as well. Like I think for a lot of students, everything is kind of like, you know, in the beginning of the university, we were told to come back because I mean, if that plan was in place, then we would have been able to come back, all of us. And then that happening, and yeah, it's very interesting, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I thought the university, at least with staff, like they were trying so hard, the university to find ways to get in-person teaching and to find ways to like have more face-to-face contact. But when we moved back to 2 meter social distancing, it was like
Yeah.
there just aren't enough rooms. Like even Darcy Thompson, which is, you know, this giant lecture theater, it can only hold like less than 20 people when you have the 2 meter social distancing. So it
Yeah.
just made everything impossible.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was gonna say like a lot of like level 4 classes as well, they aren't that big. But then again, if in that large of a room you can only have 20 people, then it's almost impossible to have, I mean, any large classes in person.
And also the level 4 modules, a lot of them are like in small groups, like you put people in
Yeah.
small groups for small discussions. How would you do that if everybody's got to be
Yeah.
4 meters apart? Like, hello, can you see my hand down? Like it just didn't make sense either. So doing it online for those sorts of modules made sense anyway.
Yeah. On the same topic, do you have any advice for like students in level 4 and level 3 as well? Kind of when I think workload ramps up a lot in those last 2 years. So do you have any advice for students in those years?
Well, I think you just have to plan your schedule. You have to kind of not just go day to day, but like get your calendar out and, you know, put your deadlines in and work backwards. I'm a big advocate of like working backwards, you know, like if this is on the Thursday, you know, what else do I have right before it that's going to interfere with me getting stuff done? Like if it's a deadline, if I have an essay due on the Thursday, or I don't know what day they're actually due, but hypothetically, you know, then because I know a lot of our students work at least part time.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about the university schedule. So if I have a thing on Thursday and it's maybe Thursday in the future, like 2 weeks on Thursday, then I like to think working backwards. Okay, I work on Wednesday, I work on Tuesday, so I'm not going to get anything done. I've got this, quiz or whatever on the Monday, so then I need to, and I like to schedule things backwards, because if I schedule things forwards, I always run out of time. So if I schedule backwards, then I can see when do I need to have what needs to be done by when in order for me to hit that fixed deadline. So I think it really is, it is about scheduling your time and thinking, how long will I need for this, and then working it backwards. Because if you work forwards, you just inflate to fill the time. You think, oh, it's not due for 2 weeks, so I can, I don't have to start yet, or, oh, maybe I'll just read this article, and, oh, here's another article, and let me just follow this thread, and you run out of time. But if you work backwards, you know that you have to have certain things done by certain dates, then you're more likely to hit your deadlines.
I have never actually heard of that. I'm definitely going to be taking note of that, I think, because I do that a lot, where I work forward, where I just, okay, I have all this time, I'll just fill it out with whatever I need to do. And then in that time, I've gone into like 3 different rabbit holes of different research articles, and then I have no time left. So I'm definitely going to be taking note of that.
Yeah, things always take longer than you expect. So that's even though I've been doing this for 100 years, I still am amazed at how long things take me. But I always try and build in buffers. And just because you've got lots of things going on, so you have to know that, like, you might think you've got 2 weeks, but really you've only got 5 days, because it's only 5 days that are free of other things. So it's about sort of having that big calendar and putting in all the stuff that you've got.
Yeah. What about for level 1 and 2? I mean, I can't even imagine how it is for level 1 and 2 this year with everything. I mean, Freshers Week was all online basically, and I mean, so many events are just more difficult to do online, and then some of them aren't even going forward online. Do you have any advice for them, just in general, for university?
Well, I think this isn't really specific to level 1 and 2. It's more general, as you say, but I think you have to figure out what you're missing and then find it. Like some people, I think it must be, it's very isolating when you're not going into class and you're just in your flat and you aren't, you can't go to the movies, you can't go shopping, you can't go, do sports together, you can't like just hang at the pub, you can't go to McDonald's, you can't do any of the normal things. But so you have to sort of figure out what is it that you are missing and try and find a way to fill that void. Whether that means just like the Halloween movie thing that you guys did with DUPS, so watch movies with friends and like comment about it, so that you can have that same sort of shared experience, or whether it's Zoom chat with your friends back home every Saturday or every Tuesday, whatever, or whether it's playing Among Us, just to get that, just to get some fun time with friends. Just whatever it is that you're missing, you have to find it for yourself, because everybody needs different things, so it can't be really done for you. And that goes for studying too. Like you can still have study groups. You can still just get together on Teams or in Collaborate or wherever, and talk through things, discuss things, read things together, share your mind maps. Draw a whole mind map on the whiteboard and Collaborate. I love the whiteboard.
Yeah.
So you have to find out what you are missing and what you need, and you have to go find it. Don't do without, I think, is the big thing. Somehow,
no, I guess it's also a good time to kind of sit down and analyze what is it you actually kind of need, I guess. Because I mean, some people might realize that, like, for example, study groups are what kind of keeps them going. And then other people might realize that, oh, study groups actually kind of pull me down. I need more like random social interaction, like non-focused social interaction. So I guess it's also, I mean, I guess you can, out of a bad situation, you can kind of use it to get to know yourself a little bit better and find out what your requirements are, I guess you could say.
Yeah. But I think the key thing is that that you, if you feel like what you need isn't there, then make it happen. Like people have to. This is a time when there's so many different needs that not every need is going to be filled by the university services or by DUPS or by the staff. So people have to be it's a time to be really self-driven, make things happen for yourselves, because you don't want to be suffering. You don't want to be suffering, so you have to. So it takes a little bit of boldness, I think, because if you're somebody where you want a study group and there isn't one that's out there, it takes a bit of boldness to send out a message saying, does anybody want to have this study group? Especially if you're in first year, you don't know people. I know DUPS has the academic families and peer support, so that might be an opportunity for people to find people to study with. But yeah, it's going to take a little bit of boldness, maybe where somebody might otherwise not normally take those initiatives. But I think to get through it, people are going to have to find their inner whatever
Courage.
bold person, and just their inner courage, and take the steps to find their own solutions, because again, there's just too many different parameters out there that there won't be something for everybody.
I guess it's scary to take the first step, but then once you do, you might get rewarded with exactly what you need, I guess you could say. We also have, I've asked a few questions already from the Instagram polls because I thought they were really interesting, but I have a few other ones as well about a bit more research focused as well, which is really interesting as well for me. But someone asked what you think the top 3 most important research skills any researcher should have.
That's tough. It so depends. It depends a little bit on like how general or how specific the skills are. I think writing skills are hugely important, like to be a good communicator. If you're actually going to try and be an academic and communicate your research through writing, then having clear writing skills is so important, because the publishing pathway really requires it. And that's a skill that you get through doing. I was such a rubbish writer when I started grad school, and one of my PhD supervisors was brutal. She would just delete, entire paragraphs. That's no good. And I never knew why. It took forever for me to improve, but it's just practice. And also, the more you read and the more you see how other things are written, the more you understand how important it is to be really clear and explicit, and to write in the style of that's appropriate to your field. So writing skills are really important if you want to be an academic. I think if you just want to be a researcher, not necessarily an academic researcher, but like in corporations or for public, for government or whatever, I think having good analytic skills is quite good, and even programming skills. I think nowadays having programming skills really gives you an edge, because it means if you can combine good kind of statistical skills with good programming skills, then there's really no limit to what kind of analysis you can do. And certainly I have felt my own limitations because I don't program, and there's so many things I'd like to do that I just can't because I don't have the skills for it, and it holds me back. So in terms of marketing oneself, if you have any kind of programming skills, it doesn't need to be like super programmer, but just using like the syntax in SPSS, or learning how to write formulas in Excel, or learning doing different types of coding that you'll learn when you set things up in Gorilla. All of those are little steps towards programming, which will then, the stronger you get with that, the more it'll open up possibilities in terms of the analysis that you can do. So I think that's really quite important. I think the other thing is probably to be open-minded. Like, you can't really be, well, this probably isn't true, but this is my personal view. I don't really think you can be a good researcher if you already know the answers. You have to be open. And that's what I found, that I had a boss in my first postdoc who was like the leader in his field, and he had this theory which he absolutely believed with all of his heart. But I was amazed that when he saw a piece of evidence that went against his theory, he was so open to it. And he was so excited by it, because he was like, this is going to move us forward. We have to account for this new piece of data. Some people get angry. Oh, that's just rubbish. That's not right. My theory says that shouldn't happen. And they're so closed off to the possibility that things are different than what they already think. And I really do think that also, they might still be hugely successful, but I don't think they get closer to the truth that way.
No, I guess you move forward by like, I mean, I guess you make a theory because you want to find the answer, and then you should be open to something that helps you find the answer even better, I guess you could say.
Exactly. You don't just want confirmation that you're right. You want the stuff that leads you to improve the theory. So I
Yeah,
was so impressed with my boss because there was one piece of data that was really problematic for him, and he was just so excited by it. You know, other people would have been upset, but he was so excited. And for me, that's the true sign of somebody who's just interested in finding the truth as close as we can come to it, as
yeah.
opposed to somebody who wants to be proven right.
I guess it's the difference between like that's like the difference between like an academic research and maybe someone who is not selling a product, but someone who like some I think can't remember what class we talked about it, but there was like some people they make research based on the theory and then they sell products based on that theory. I guess if they found some evidence against their theory, it might be an issue for them in a lot of different ways.
Yes, that's why it's always important to look at who's funding research.
Yeah. Another question as well. I think this will be the last question as well.
Okay.
Someone asked, is it difficult to get funding for fundamental versus applied research in psychology?
It is difficult to get funding at all. It is so difficult to get funding at all, but it is I would say it probably is more difficult to get funding for fundamental than applied research because of the priorities of the funding agencies. So some funding agencies might have as their like mission statement to um, advance X or Y specific initiative. Like, I don't know, I think the Nuffield Trust, for example, have as part of their mission statement to advance our educational pursuits or social pursuits. So they want to make sure that whatever they're funding is going to have some kind of impact on what we know or how we implement educational initiatives or social initiatives. And the research councils as well, because the government gets a lot of flack for funding things that people don't understand why it's important. So the government also started driving an impact agenda, which they still are driving quite heavily, which says that any piece of research has to kind of make clear how it's going to benefit society or benefit the economy or benefit something. And it's hard to do that with fundamental research.
Does that kind of play in with the replication crisis as well, where it's hard to replicate maybe more classic studies because it's not seen as being as relevant because we already know this, why we need to change it or why we need to test it again?
Well, it's true. It's hard to get funding for something like that. It's hard to get funding for something if you're just replicating, because they always want to say, well, what's the new, what's the advanced, what's the, a lot of funding agencies want you to be like pushing the boundaries on things. But there is quite a drive for reproducibility. So sometimes if you're doing like, there's these various kind of big multi-lab projects where people are trying to really test some fundamental finding, and they want to do it, across laboratories, across researchers, and across to make sure it's not just, something built into a lab. Those things I think do get funding because it's so they can anyway. But just in general, funding is a nightmare.
Is it a hard process as well, like actually like applying to get funding? Because I know, for example, I mean, for fourth years, for example, and I mean, everyone will have to do it as well. Bachelor's project, when you apply for ethics, I think a lot of people, it's quite a big thing. Like you have to figure out what you want and how, like, what the ethics are of it. You kind of have to apply what you learned in first year about ethics, and then also the pre-registration. But I'm wondering if a bigger project, for example, like not a bachelor's project, does that kind of increase as well, or like does it become like an even larger file you have to send in and even like more information, or is it like how does that work exactly actually?
It depends. Each funding agency has their own requirements, but yes, you usually have to have a clear case for support. That's what it's usually called, which would be sort of a description of the study. which is usually, well, it depends on the funding agency, but quite explicit about what it is that you're going to do and why you're doing it and how you're doing it and what you're going to measure and what you're predicting and why it's important and blah, blah. So that has to be, all explicit and clear, but sometimes quite short, so written really concisely. You also have to justify the money that you're requesting. So you have to say, I need 500 pounds for a new computer, and I need 1,000 pounds for participant money, and I need 20,000 pounds for a research assistant, and I need, so you have to, penny by penny justify the money that you need. And then there's usually like other kind of, you have to write, there's lots of little bits and pieces you have to write. You have to write an abstract, then you have to write a summary for lay people so that if it goes on their website, people can see what it is. So you have these little bits and pieces. So you write the case for support and you think, right, that's my grant. But actually that's just one piece of it. There's also all these, justifications and explain who's going to benefit from it and explain how you're going to have impact and how you're going to make sure that impact happens and how you're going to spend your money and where you're going to publish it and da. So it can be quite big. It depends. But it isn't always like that. Sometimes it's just like a 2-page summary of what you want to do and some timeline of how you're going to get it done. It just depends on the funder and the amount of the size of the grant.
Okay.
Either way, it's a pain and it's difficult. It's always competitive. Even if you're applying for 10,000 pounds, it's always competitive.
Well, I feel like that's nice to know as well for anyone. I mean, going into postgrad and PhD afterwards, it seems like it's a lot. I feel like the bachelor's project is just like a taste of it, or like not even like funding, but just like a taste of having to kind of sit down and analyze your entire project before you do it.
Yeah, but I think it's really good. I mean, you need to know what it makes sure that all the projects are grounded in something and not just, kind of dreamt up on a park bench one Saturday. Like, wouldn't it be interesting to know everything's, because when you write it up at the end of the day, you have to contextualize it in the literature. So if you just dream up a project on the bench, like, I wonder what would happen if, then you go to write it up. It might be that there's no story to tell there. You don't want to be in that position. So
Yeah.
the whole as predicted thing is I think it's really helpful for the students to have that clarity at the front. And obviously the ethics are important because we want to make sure we're not doing anything unethical and make sure that we're not causing anybody undue risk or harm. But yeah, it is a lot. I think if anybody is out there who's interested in becoming a researcher or interested in becoming an academic, my number one piece of advice is grow a thick skin.
Okay.
That's what my supervisor always said to me. When I would be upset about something, she'd say, "You got to grow a thick skin, Alissa."
I feel like that's a good piece of advice for anyone.
Because the whole job is full of rejection. You write a paper, you pour your heart into it, it gets rejected. You write a grant, you spend a year on it, it gets rejected. You send in an abstract for a conference, it gets rejected. The whole job is full of rejection, and every rejection is kind of personal because you worked so hard on it. So you have to really let things roll off you. You have to really just accept that that's part of the job and accept that that's the reality of the situation. And just because it was rejected doesn't mean it will be rejected next time, and doesn't mean it was bad. It just means that they didn't like it, or it can be improved, and you should see it always again as an opportunity to improve things. But yes, thick skin, water off a duck's back. You can't, if you take it personally, you'll never succeed.
Yeah.
Too much heartbreak.
Thank you so much. I feel like that's a good note to end on. I think it's quite relevant for anyone. So thank you so much. Do you have any last things you want to say to all the students?
Well, I guess I just go back to what I said at the beginning, that as the head, I really want you to feel that I'm somebody you can contact if you're having difficulty. Again, if you've got lots of points of support, you've got your advisor, you've got the lecturers, you've got your dissertation supervisor if you're in 4th year, you have Elaine, but you also have me. And I'm really glad you're doing this so that we can try and, that you're introducing all of the staff to students, because we do have a lot of exciting new staff. And hopefully one day we will see each other again in person. and we'll know each other. We'll know each other because we've seen this video.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the idea, that like for especially like first year and second year, once they actually get to see more of the lectures, they'll already kind of know them as well. So it's not like so they don't have to have that awkward introduction all over again. So thank you so much. To anyone listening, again, please make sure to check out our socials, because again, we do things, even though this is all a bit strange. We're applying a lot of different things, and we have a lot of different ideas of how to engage you both with, other years, but also within your own year as well. So please make sure to check out our socials. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. It was a joy.